And I went upstairs. My mom isn't answering. It was just past 10 a.m. on a quiet morning in Troy, Illinois. A routine emergency call rang through dispatch. Initially, it sounded like a possible medical emergency. A man, disoriented and hesitant, stammered through his words as he described his concern about his mother. He couldn't hear her walking through the house. She wasn't responding. He didn't want to go into her room. Does she need an ambulance? The dispatcher asked repeatedly. I don't know. I have no idea, he muttered. What sounded like an ordinary welfare check soon spiraled into a haunting discovery. One of the most brutal domestic crimes in the history of this small Midwestern town. The chilling 911 call would become evidence. Troy, Illinois, a town where everyone knows each other by name. The kind of place where brutal homicides just don't happen, especially not to someone like Norma J. Carricker, a beloved mother of 4 and the widow of a former mayor. For the people of Troy, the news was almost too shocking to believe. We're hurt, we're broken. It took us all by surprise. Norma had always been described as a beacon of light, kind, generous, and deeply loved within the community. She worked multiple jobs to support herself and kept her home open to her children, even her troubled son Neil. But behind the small town's smiles and warm greetings at the local diner, a storm had been brewing, and now the town was left grappling with grief and questions. Neil Howard wasn't famous, nor was he particularly known in his community, at least not for anything good. But on the morning of Norma's murder, his name would become unforgettable. Born around 1978, Neil led a troubled life veiled in secrecy, anger, and a history of unchecked violence. Interviews with those who knew him, including his sister and ex-girlfriend, painted the portrait of a deeply unstable man, emotionally volatile, angry, and unpredictable. Neil was the kind of person who never outgrew his demons. They had a very complicated relationship, one family friend commented. In fact, Neil's past was littered with red flags. 2000 to 2001, 2 separate domestic battery charges in Illinois. 2004, convicted of DUI. 2005, arrested in connection with the murder of his father, George W. Howard, in Dallas County, Texas. Although charges were dropped, suspicions lingered. 2007 to 2008, violated probation followed by another domestic violence case. 2011, court-ordered protection issued after Neil allegedly threatened his own children. 2016, another domestic battery charge. 2022, just a year before the murder, he was once again in court for domestic violence. These weren't isolated incidents. They were a pattern, and the warning signs had been there for years. Norma was more than just a statistic in a tragic crime. At 60, she was full of life. A dedicated mother, a loving friend, and a hardworking community member. Her late husband, Tom Carricker, had once served as mayor of Troy. The couple had built a life of service and stability, at least on the surface. But behind closed doors, Norma struggled. Friends whispered about her increased drinking, her odd behavior, and a string of online relationships. She worked 3 jobs, often exhausted, but always showing up. Her daughter would later say, "Ever since my stepdad died, my mom's been a wreck. She's not been herself. She's been drinking, meeting strange men off dating apps. I don't even let my kids visit her anymore." Still, despite everything, she never turned her back on Neil. Even though he was a grown man living in her basement, unemployed, bitter, and spiraling, Norma remained, like many mothers, hopeful he would change. The call came in disjointed, disturbing. Neil's voice cracked. He rambled about hearing noises, bangs, his mother lying in bed, not moving, bleeding. He mentioned Tinder, country music turned up too loud, and claimed he didn't want to go into the room. When the officers arrived, they found Neil outside, heavily intoxicated, incoherent, but oddly calm. He claimed his mother was fine, just inside with someone. But when officers entered the bedroom, the truth was horrifying. Norma was found choked, bloodied, lifeless, a bungee cord wrapped tightly around her neck. "She's still warm. I started CPR," one officer said, but she didn't make it. The scene quickly transitioned from a welfare check to an active homicide investigation. Neil was immediately detained. His behavior shifted from confused to hostile. He protested the officer's actions, claimed to be wrongly accused, and questioned why he was being hemmed up. "This is BS, man. I'm hurt. You got me like this behind my back." The officers weren't buying it. His story didn't add up. He claimed to have heard the back door open but never saw anyone leave. He insinuated his mother was with someone else. But the forensic evidence told a different story. Neil was the only person there. He said she had a date. He said she was just sleeping. He said a lot of things. But the blood, the cord, the position of the body, and his criminal past all pointed to a singular conclusion. This was no accident. This was murder. Make sure to hit that subscribe button if you're passionate about unraveling true crime stories just like this one. What do you think? Was Neil Howard a ticking time bomb that everyone ignored? Or is there more to the story than meets the eye? Let us know in the comments below. As officers attempted to detain Neil Howard at the scene, his behavior unraveled in real time, swinging between indignation, paranoia, and emotional breakdowns. Though told repeatedly he was only detained, Neil lashed out with frustration. "This is all wrong. I can't believe you're doing this to me." He demanded to know why he was being held. His voice shook, not from fear for his mother, but for himself. His rambling made little sense, circling back to Norma's phone. The men she met online, and a reality no one else could verify. "She's meeting guys. Look at her phone. Look at them." He was erratic, belligerent, and combative. Officers attempted to calm him, but Neil refused to cooperate. "I'm declining everything, medical everything." Then came the obscenities, profanity-laced tirades, accusations, desperate attempts to redirect blame, anywhere but himself. But the evidence was building. Norma had been strangled. There were no signs of forced entry, no tracks in the grass, no real indication. As officers prepared to transport Neil back to the police station, his resistance escalated. "You guys are hurting me. My arms are bleeding. My hands are numb." What stood out wasn't just his physical complaints, it was the content of what he was saying. Neil insisted he wasn't allowed upstairs, that he was raised this way, as if that somehow explained a crime scene soaked in blood and strewn with chaos. "I'm supposed to watch the house, but I'm not allowed to go upstairs." The contradiction in his own story was glaring. He said he didn't go up the stairs, yet he called 911 because something was wrong. He said his mom was fine, then admitted she wasn't answering. And now, with officers escorting him to the car, he let out a line that shocked everyone. "My father was the mayor," as if that legacy could protect him from the murder charge now forming. Neil's demeanor shifted once he arrived at the station. He wasn't yelling anymore, but he wasn't calm either. "I haven't had water in 3 hours. I'm freezing. I can't move my hand." The man who once shouted profanities at officers now played the victim card, but his erratic behavior continued. He talked about his phone, his girlfriend, his reputation. "Look at my phone. I told her I was busy. I didn't even know what happened to my mom." He rambled about not being able to make noise in the house, about being embarrassed, about people judging him. Officers, maintaining professionalism, reminded him of his rights and prepared him for interrogation. He was fingerprinted, processed, and seated. The only real question left was whether Neil would finally speak the truth or continue the tangled web of lies he'd spun since the first 911 call. "You have the right to remain silent. Do you understand?" Neil did, and he waived that right. Detectives knew they were sitting across from their prime suspect in a first-degree murder investigation. His mother was dead. The scene suggested premeditation, not an accident, not a random act. Strangulation by ligature, possibly with a bungee cord. The lead investigator began slowly, not with accusations, but with conversation. His approach was calm, calculated. "Neil, a lot of the questions I'm going to ask, I already know the answers. I just need to hear them from you." At first, Neil cooperated. He claimed to be an honest guy, a victim of circumstance. He blamed others. He distanced himself from the crime. But detectives weren't looking for confessions. They were watching for inconsistencies, and Neil gave them plenty. Neil claimed he never laid a hand on his mother, not once. Never got physical with her. "Ask my sister. Ask anyone." He emphasized how much he respected Norma, how he'd never hurt her. But his criminal record told another story, a history of domestic violence, restraining orders, and child endangerment. His narrative didn't fit his past. Detectives asked about scratches, if Norma might have fought back. No, not scratched. Nothing happened. They asked about his pants, ripped and stained. These are old work pants. Ask my girl. She always tells me to throw them away. The answers came fast, defensive, preemptive. Neil was trying to plug holes before they even formed. But forensic investigators were already collecting DNA samples from beneath Norma's fingernails. The clock was ticking. One of the detectives finally cut through the fog. If there was a struggle, any struggle at all, her fingernails would tell us. It doesn't take much for DNA to show up. It was a turning point. If Neil was bluffing, this was the moment to backtrack, but he stood firm, insisting no fight had occurred, no confrontation, no violence. He denied everything. We didn't even eat. I didn't know she passed until you guys told me. But the evidence wasn't on his side. No forced entry, no signs of a third party, a tight ligature mark around Norma's neck, blood on the pillow, a lifetime of violence leading to this moment. Neil had been unraveling for years, and on that night, the rage finally snapped. Howard, especially dangerous, wasn't just his violent past. It was his manipulation. He knew how to sound remorseful, how to disarm officers with charm and then pivot into confusion. You're a nice guy. I'm just going to tell you what I told the others. But the investigator wasn't fooled. All I want is honesty. I don't judge you, but I want to know the real you, the person behind the words. Because right now, I don't believe this story ends here. Every moment of the interview was cataloged. Every gesture, every change in tone. Investigators were building a psychological profile, one that would be used in court to demonstrate motive, method, and mindset. As the interview ended, one thing became painfully clear. Neil Howard was the only person who could have killed Norma, and everyone in that room knew it. But justice moved slowly. Detectives would wait for the DNA results, reconstruct the crime scene, examine digital forensics from Norma's phone, and review Neil's movements in the hours before the murder. The case against him wasn't just emotional. It was scientific, physical, and deeply rooted in a long-standing pattern of abuse, paranoia, and escalation. News of the murder rocked Troy, Illinois. Norma Carricker wasn't just another victim. She was a symbol of community. Her kindness, her public service, her resilience through grief after her husband's death, all of it made her loss even more devastating. And now, her name was in headlines next to homicide, strangulation, and domestic violence. Her death became a cautionary tale about ignored red flags, unhealed trauma, and the price of unchecked rage. You're still with us. Hit that subscribe button to stay updated on true crime stories like this. Do you think Neil Howard planned this murder, or did he snap in a moment of rage? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Neil Howard had every opportunity to tell the truth. The officers weren't hostile. They gave him space, time, and clarity. Yet even as the detective carefully explained the seriousness of the case, Neil kept making excuses. I don't know what's going on. I'm just trying to figure out what happened. But every word sounded hollow. The detective, calm and deliberate, laid it out plainly. Whenever there's a death, we work for the victim, and in this case, that's your mother. We start with everyone close to her. Our job is to either prove someone did it or that they didn't. That meant DNA, and Neil knew it. He was informed a search warrant had been issued. He would be swabbed for DNA. His reaction? Dazed, confused. He mumbled about texting his sister, about his mom being hurt, not dead, about just sitting on the stairs waiting, but it was too late for deflection. The detective explained what was next. The pathologist will conduct a full sexual assault kit. They'll scrape under her fingernails, swab key areas. If someone touched her, especially during a struggle, we'll find DNA. Neil's face shifted. He said he was scared, that the house felt eerie, that he hesitated before entering his mother's room. He rambled about Tinder messages, about strange men his mom allegedly invited over, but the science would speak louder than Neil ever could, and what forensic investigators found would seal his fate. DNA under Norma's fingernails, matching Neil perfectly. When pressed about the timeline, Neil got tangled in his own lies. He insisted, I didn't go in the room until officers told me to, but then admitted, I talked to her at 8:30. I told my sister, let me talk to her. He said he didn't see her, then that he did, then that he couldn't remember, that she was hurt but not dead. The contradictions were damning, and the detective saw right through it. You were the last person with her, the last to see her, the last to speak to her. You are the only link we have to this homicide. Neil didn't argue the logic. He just kept trying to change the narrative, desperate, deflecting, caught in his own crumbling web. If there was one thread Neil clung to, it was his sister. Over and over, he begged to call her. Let me talk to my sister. I need to talk to her. It was almost compulsive, like he needed her to validate his story or anchor him in reality. But to detectives, it reeked of manipulation. We know you contacted her right before the murder. We know about the missed calls, the texts, and now suddenly, you want to call her again? Why? It was clear. Neil was trying to control the narrative before it spiraled beyond his grasp, and deep down, he knew it already had. As the interrogation intensified, Neil tried flipping the situation. You're holding me against my will. This isn't right. But the officer remained focused. You're not under arrest, yet. But you're our only lead, our only link to Norma. And that means we need you to stay. Neil exploded. I gave you everything. I told you everything I know. I should have stayed silent. But silence wouldn't save him now. The detective tried one last appeal. Neil, role reverse. If this happened to your mom, wouldn't you want the only person who could help to stay and help? Neil responded with confusion and defiance. His words circled back again and again to himself. Never his mother. Never the horror of what had happened. Eventually, Neil fell into a strange state of stillness. He refused to talk, pretended to sleep, sat in the interrogation room for 3 hours, motionless, silent, as if nothing had happened. But the officers didn't need his confession. The truth was in the DNA. Underneath Norma Carricker's fingernails, defensive wounds from a woman fighting for her life. Investigators found one genetic match, Neil A. Howard. The forensic report was ironclad. There was no doubt. He had murdered his own mother. The trial came swiftly. Neil's erratic interviews, his violent past, his tangled timeline, they all worked against him. And when the forensic report was entered into evidence, the courtroom fell silent. Guilty. Neil Howard was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 30 years in prison. There was no celebration, only a cold, somber quiet. Justice had been served, but it came too late for Norma. Troy, Illinois still bears the scars. The murder of Norma Carricker was more than a domestic tragedy. It was a devastating fracture in a town where things like this weren't supposed to happen. The red flags were there for years, said one local. Neil's history of domestic abuse, violent outbursts, and mental instability had been visible to many, but no one had ever stepped in strongly enough. Norma, a loving mother, a respected figure, a woman who had already survived the death of her husband, paid the ultimate price for giving her son one last chance. Now the town is left asking, could this have been prevented? Should someone have intervened earlier? Was justice truly served, or was it already too late? We may never have all the answers, but the DNA, the surveillance, the 911 call, and Neil's erratic testimony, they told a story that Neil never would. We want to hear from you. Do you believe this tragedy could have been avoided? Was 30 years enough? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're drawn to stories that expose the darkest corners of the human mind, hit subscribe to follow more cases like this one. Check out our next video. It's one of our most chilling investigations yet.